Welcome to the 400th episode
Wow,
of the Author to Authority podcast. I'm your host,
it's
Kim
incredible.
Thompson-Pinder, and I'm here today with John Lusher, and he's going to help us
Hmm.
celebrate this momentous occasion. And for once, I am not going to be doing the interviewing.
No?
So John's here today.
Really?
To interview me. So, John, why don't you take a moment? You've been on the show before.
Hmm.
You are a treasured part of the Author to Authority podcast. But for those who may not
Thank
know
you.
you, take a few minutes and just introduce yourself.
Absolutely, Kim. Thank you for inviting me back on. It's always good when somebody asks you to be on their podcast or their live stream or whatever it is. But it's even better when they ask you back. I consider the second ask the most important because that means that you either did something right or you didn't do anything wrong. So it was one or the other. No, I'm happy to be here. Uh, I'm John Lusher. I am a digital marketer by trade, I guess you would say. I'm the social buzz lab. We build buzz for brands. We build buzz for entrepreneurs, for professionals, depending upon what they're looking to accomplish with either advertising, marketing, or digital media. We consider ourselves kind of a digital first marketing agency. That doesn't mean that we don't get into traditional forms of marketing, traditional forms of advertising, because we do. And we have some clients that use those day in and day out. But as we know, I mean, this medium that we're talking about here, it's digital audio, video type first anymore. So that's where we specialize in working with brands and professionals to really manage their digital media and to manage their social media. The easiest thing about social media is getting started because it's free to sign up. The hardest thing about social media is keeping it going because it's time, energy, and effort. And quite honestly, a lot of professionals, a lot of brands just don't have that time to devote to it. A lot of companies have small marketing departments or a marketing person, not a department. And that's where we come in. A lot of times we work with existing marketing teams or companies that don't have a marketing team or department, and we're kind of their marketing arm, so to speak. Almost to the point of like a fractional CMO, but
Mhm.
mostly it's just working to supplement what they may have in place or fill those gaps to where they don't have that person on staff. So enjoy doing it. It's been doing it for over 10 years now. And the thing that we all know, especially about digital media with the recent introduction of threads, is it's an ever changing, ever evolving, sometimes maddeningly frustrating medium. So we try to help keep the sanity level in check with our clients as they try to work through and utilize digital media.
Well, audience, first of all, I can tell you, John has helped me with quite a few things. He knows what he is talking about. Also, John, you forgot to mention something really important, so I'll just mention it here.
Okay.
John's episode was chosen as one of the
Ah,
top
that's right.
25 all-time Author to Authority episodes. And so it played in August, and
Hmm.
it was, if you want to hear John's episode, it was episode 396 and it
Hmm.
played in August. So go
Hmm.
on back and listen to it because that was an
Thank you.
incredible interview
Well, thank you.
that we did, and just it just was so powerful in terms of
Hmm.
understanding marketing, and especially in the LinkedIn realm. And just so you
Hmm.
know, I audience, I did sign up for Threads and I am using it. And I've only been on it a couple of weeks. I already have
Hmm.
200 followers.
Yep. It's a good medium. It's a lot of people are comparing it to the golden olden days of Twitter when it
Mhm.
was more community feel, community based. I'm glad to see that Threads started out the way it did. Of course, we've all seen a lot of press lately that the usage has dropped, the new signups have dropped. Well, that's typical. That happens with every social platform. There's a big rush for everyone to sign up. And part of that is the fear of missing out. Everybody else is on Threads. I got to be on Threads. So there's a piece of that to the puzzle. But I think it's also that people get involved with it, and they realize, and this is one thing with Threads specifically, but really it applies to all social platforms. But they sign up and they realize they have to put in that time, energy, and effort again to build that community, to engage with that community. And quite honestly, Kim, where most people not drop the ball, but where most people fall off with their social media is that engagement piece,
Yeah.
because it truly takes time. Now on Threads, it seems like that is holding, and people are still continuing to engage. The people that are active Threads users day in and day out are getting a lot of engagement. The people that are hit and miss, they're there one day and then 5 days later they come back and they're like, well, I'm not getting an engagement. Well, no kidding. It's the same on any social platform. It doesn't mean that you have to post every day, but you have to be active and engaging. So it'll be interesting to see how Threads plays out, as well as the name change with Twitter to X and everything else. It's a constantly evolving landscape.
Yeah, you know what? We need to have you on. Let's do a Threads episode because today's the
Oh, that'd be
400th, and
that'd be
we
awesome.
can spend the whole episode talking about Threads. And
No,
I'd
that would
love
be
to.
awesome. Now, I would like to do that. We need to plan for that. But that's not the topic for today. The topic for today is to interview you, of course,
Mhm.
and to celebrate the milestone of 400 episodes. And if you stop and think about that, and it's funny because I've been at this long enough to say I listened to podcasts the first time they became popular. It was several years ago, and it was funny because they kind of leveled off for a while, and then all of a sudden, they're back now. It's more,
The
and I
pandemic
think
hit.
the pandemic really drove a lot of the popularity of podcasts and audio networks and things like that. But my point being is, I was starting down this point that I was trying to make, is 400 episodes is quite a milestone. I think a
Mhm.
lot of people that start podcasts, it's the stick to itiveness that falls off. So 400 episodes is incredible. And
Mhm.
I guess the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about that many episodes is, one, why did you start the Author to Authority podcast? And give us some of that background as to not only why, but what was the burning desire in you that you wanted to bring this to the masses?
Well, there were several reasons I started the podcast. First of all, I love to teach and train. So when I was a child, my goal was to become a music teacher.
I love it.
And I
Hmm.
unofficially did when my kids were little because I spent 7 years volunteering in my kids' school teaching
Oh
music.
wow, good for you.
But I love to teach and train. Even as an entrepreneur, my heart was I wanna help people and I wanna
Hmm.
teach and train them. That's how I got into writing books. I didn't necessarily wanna become an author, but it was a great medium for me to teach and train people.
Hmm.
I was in network marketing at the time, direct sales, and I wanted to make tools that my team could use to help
Hmm.
them build their businesses. And books was a great way to do it because I could hand them a book, they could read the book. I didn't have to be personally involved with them reading the book, but then they could come to me and ask questions, and we could put together a game plan so that
Nice.
they could implement the things that they had learned in the book. So that's how I started
Hmm.
publishing books.
That's smart.
And so
Makes
back
sense.
in 2019, one of my clients was a podcast specialist.
Hmm.
And so all this time I'm watching him on his podcast. We're talking about podcasting in his book. I'm listening to him and I'm going, ooh, maybe this is something I should do. Uh, Now, to be audience, and I've said this before, I'm not the hugest podcast person. Like I'm a
Hmm.
visual medium. Like one of the reasons I'm a publisher is because I love books.
That makes sense. Hmm.
But the more he talked about podcasts, the more I recognized that it was a medium that entrepreneurs love to use.
Hmm.
So, if you're, a consultant, a professional, a speaker,
Hmm.
when you're looking at getting that visibility, you
Uh-huh.
can't just pick the mediums that you like.
Or that you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so, uh, and because this gentleman was my client, basically I got a lot of it for free. I gave him a bit
Oh,
of a
nice.
discount on the book. We traded off some things, and he set everything up for my podcast. I didn't have to set anything up. And he also showed me systems on how to use the podcast and monetize it right from the very start. So I was really fascinated with this because it was something I could do. I was doing Toastmasters at the time, so
Mm-hmm.
my speaking abilities had increased substantially. I
Mm-hmm.
felt way more comfortable in front of a
Good.
microphone. And I thought, you know what? Let's go for it.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yep.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I'm the impulsive one. I'm the
That's
impulsive
okay.
entrepreneur that says, hey, that's cool. Let's just do it. We'll figure out all the problems later.
That's right.
And
Well,
sometimes I've been wrong. Sometimes
well,
I've been right.
that that's a hallmark of a good entrepreneur, in my opinion. Is sometimes we're wrong, sometimes we're right, sometimes we're completely off base. And I think one of the appeals of podcasting is just like the different social platforms, we all consume content differently.
Mhm.
For some people, they literally their entire day as they're doing other stuff, they have YouTube videos playing. That's how they consume content. They're video first. Other people are, voracious readers.
Mhm.
Whether it's a book, whether it's a magazine, whether it's publication, white paper, they read the printed word more than anything else. But more and more, and you're right, the pandemic pushed this a lot. But more and more people are using audio because it's a way for them to consume the content
Mhm.
while they're doing a lot of other tasks. Typically, or for me, on my typical day, as I'm working and doing other things, whatever that may be, I have my headphones in. I'm listening to a variety of podcasts, on different topics, and it to me, it's a much more efficient way of
Mhm.
consuming content for people that are publishing podcasts or maybe even looking to start a podcast. It's a way to reach people where they live, so to speak. They may not always be on LinkedIn. They may not always be on Threads or YouTube, but
Mhm.
the podcast. The great thing about that is they can consume that content literally anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's a medium that lends itself to that.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
I so agree. I so agree, John. And that was one of the reasons why I decided to do it. I mean,
Hmm.
I to be honest, I got into it not realizing how much work a podcast is.
you know,
And in the
it's funny you
beginning,
should say that. Yes.
my
Hmm.
client was doing all the background work.
Hmm.
So it was
Exactly.
easy. I just recorded the episodes, uploaded
Yep.
them. I was done.
Well,
Then
and I
things
think,
changed.
and I think really that's also a good way to describe just social media, digital
Mhm,
media in general. It's easy to get into, just like podcasting. It's tough though to put in the work and to keep it going and to consistently produce that product.
yeah.
I always tell people, and I think you and I may have had this as part of our conversation, and it's definitely a conversation that I had with our mutual friend Mike Garrison, who introduced us, and who is, while this is streaming live, is sending me smart aleck text messages. But when you decide to start a podcast, it's like deciding to start a YouTube channel or publish blog articles. You need to decide on the frequency
Yeah.
that works for you. Maybe it's weekly, maybe it's monthly. There's some people out there in the podcast world, the larger names that are publishing 2 or 3 podcasts a week. And I'm like, well, yeah, they have an entire staff behind them. They just sit down and talk with what it was prepared for them. So they're
Mhm.
doing the easy part. But for an entrepreneur or for a brand, they have to stop and think, how can I sustain this long
Yeah.
term? And it's a testimony to you and your organization, the fact that we're sitting here talking about 400 episodes, because a lot of people never get to that point. They
Yeah.
either start trailing off, or it just gets to be too much of a commitment that they cannot keep that going for long term. So I think that's something for people to really think about. If they're going to launch something like a podcast or even a YouTube channel, think long term. That's
Yeah.
why, don't put all your time, energy, and effort into making it exactly perfect. Put that time, energy, and effort into delivering a good product, but planning long term, because
Yeah.
otherwise you're going to die out after a while. So that's
Well, I
good.
mean, the first 3 years of the podcast, I mean, the first year was somewhat consistent, but definitely
Hmm.
years 2 and 3,
It's
inconsistent. I mean,
tough.
there was times I took a few months off there because
Yeah.
I was now doing everything myself and I didn't have the
Hmm.
money and, my life was falling apart and,
That's
uh
why we have best of episodes when life happens.
yeah, exactly. Um, but last year,
Hmm.
after moved to Nova Scotia, got through the hurricane, got settled in Nova
Hmm.
Scotia, was starting to rebuild the business again. I really took another look at podcasting, and
Hmm.
I had decided, I'd already invested a lot of time in it, but it was time
Hmm.
to really take massive action.
Right.
And so that's when I went to 3 episodes a week, and
Hmm.
I made a commitment to myself. And I think November, December, I think it was mostly 3 episodes a week, but from
Hmm.
January 2023, it has been consistently 3 episodes a
Good
week,
job.
and not an episode has been missed because this is the year to take massive action.
Well, good for you. Good for you. Well done. Um, Speaking of episodes, and other than present company being excluded, talk about uh, out of 400 episodes, what are some of the favorite guests that you've had on the show, and explain why, just for the audience.
Um, well, going back to the beginning, um, I had Bob Berg on. He was my
Hmm.
first guest episode. Please, well, you can't actually access it anymore because I lost the first 88 and they haven't all been reposted yet. But
Yeah,
uh, I probably won't repost that episode, though I probably should because it
you
wasn't
should.
on my end. It wasn't all that good. Uh,
But that's okay because we all start from somewhere.
uh, so first of all, I mean I love Bob Berg. He
Hmm.
is a dear man, amazing, mentor, teacher, and all that. But when I interviewed him, I knew him well enough to ask him to be on my show, but I didn't
Hmm.
really. And I remember I was so nervous and I couldn't think of questions to ask him. And I didn't print out the questions that he had sent to me. And I'm trying to do
Hmm.
this off the cuff. And he
Yep.
had just ended up carrying the whole episode for me.
So it was a 100% Bob episode.
Yeah, pretty well. And I'm like, that's so awesome. And then I kept saying that. I'm like, I gotta think of
Mhm.
something else to say.
That's
Uh,
okay.
you
Sounds
know,
like he was a
um,
good guest, though.
yeah. Oh, some of the people I've had on are not necessarily famous, but they are
Okay.
incredible people. Ram Nayar, that was in the
Hmm.
first series as well, and I am going to repost his up. Actually, I'm going to do a new episode with him. He's a
Hmm.
client of mine, but he's a Canadian Olympic coach,
Oh, cool.
and so his was on fearlessness. I have
Nice.
had so many over the years that you after 400 episodes, you
Hmm.
kinda lose track, but
Hmm.
I can't always tell you names, but here are the elements of my favorite episodes, and they're all the same.
Okay. That
First
makes
of
sense.
all, it was a wonderfully engaging conversation.
Right.
There
Which,
was
yeah.
back and forth, we were kind of feeding off of each
Hmm.
other. Sometimes it went in unexpected directions,
Hmm.
and, those were the type of episodes where I'm like, I came out of thinking, "Oh, that's such a good episode." Like, our conversations, John, are like that.
Hmm.
Like, when you and I talk, we feed off each other, we go back
Hmm.
and forth, it's an engaging conversation, lots of
I was just
golden.
getting ready to say it's engaging instead
Yeah,
of just host and guest. And we've all heard podcasts like this, and we've heard interviews like this, to where you can tell that the only thing that they're doing is reading a question and the other person's answering.
yeah,
There's none of that back and forth. There's none of that, okay, we start on this topic and then we go 6 lanes down the road into different topics. But to me, that's not just a sign of a great host or a great guest. It's that engagement of literally having a conversation in the back and forth piece. And to me, as a listener, that's what's going to keep my attention. If it's just somebody sitting there talking for 15 minutes, after about 5 minutes, I'm probably going to move on to another episode because people want that back and forth, that engagement piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I agree. And to be honest, like most guests I have, you know, a lot of them send me the questions ahead of time that they,
Well, sure,
generally
the
get
prep
asked as
work.
part of their media kit or whatever. Do you know what? I never look at them.
Really?
I
That is
don't
interesting.
want to ask the questions that they get asked all the time. I want to know the stuff that they don't tell on other podcasts.
Okay. Well, no, that makes sense.
I,
I
I
mean,
want to do
that
like
makes
the
sense.
deep dive. I want the
Mhm.
good juicy. I've actually had a few people tell me, they're like, Kim, like you pulled stuff out of me I never thought I would say publicly. Not in a bad way, but just I don't want the fluff. Like I don't want the fluff that you share all the time. No, sorry.
Well,
It's not fluff. I don't want the generic material that you
right.
share all the time. Like let's go deep. Let into your
Well,
story.
and it can also become or come across, I guess, as too rehearsed.
Yeah.
I mean, it literally does sound like a rehearsed interview.
Mhm.
Um, and you have to guard against that because there again, I think personally that's a way to turn off your audience. If it's
Yeah.
too rehearsed and it's just a litany of questions and answers, it really doesn't bring out anything that, quite honestly, if I wanted to take the time to do it, your guest is Bob Smith and he does this. Well, I could probably find out everything about Bob Smith by doing a Google search. And if
Mhm.
it's just that generic type question and answers, it doesn't get into anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't get into what are you passionate about and why. The things that a lot of times that people just overlook. And with having something a commitment like you've had with the podcast here, talking about as far as your favorite guests, does one particular episode stand out to you? As in, to my dying day, I'm always going to remember that episode. And if so, obviously, I want to know why that episode stands out. But I also would like to know, as far as the guest in that episode,
Mhm.
do they feel the same way about it? And I know that you
Well,
may not know
John,
that
yours is actually
specifically, but
one of those episodes. That's why you were chosen as the top 25.
well,
Um,
thank you.
but one of the episodes, when you put it that way, that stands out is Jason Barnard.
Hmm.
And he was talking about, what happens when people Google your name and,
Hmm.
what
I
shows
remember
up
that one.
and what could be done about it. And it
Hmm.
was such an engaging conversation. And one of the things that I remember, it was just something I had never heard before. When
Hmm.
you do a podcast and, you're always talking about sales and marketing and all of these
Hmm.
things, um, most of the time, what the guests share, I've heard
Hmm.
before.
Well,
And
sure, that makes
it might
sense.
be put in a really unique way, which is amazing.
But it's not
But
new information necessarily.
yeah, but
Hmm.
Jason's that episode caught me off guard because I was like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about Google," and then he gets into it, and I was like, "Wow." I'm
Well,
like, I've never heard this before. So that was one of the episodes, and actually his was chosen as one of the
mhm,
top 25 too. So his episode was right after yours. So
mhm.
go back to episode 396, listen to John's, and then go to episode 397 and listen to Jason's
Yeah,
because
that's
um
fascinating.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And when to me, when the podcast host is learning something and
Mhm.
that comes through on the podcast, I think that also helps validate to the listener,
Mhm.
not just the podcast host, but the guest. And it's funny because the whole, reputation and what happens if you search for yourself. I remember years ago when I first got into doing this, my
Mhm.
colleague and I here in Southwest Virginia, we actually had weekly meetup groups. That was my colleague and I, um, and local business owners, professionals that literally just wanted to get together and learn more about this new thing called social media
Yeah.
and how to use it. One thing that we always, and I've always told people, is, Google yourself, your name, and especially if you have a unique name, that makes it even more interesting, and see what comes back. Set up Google alerts for your name, to where if it appears somewhere, you'll get a notification. And it's amazing even to this day that people don't do a lot of that type of research on themselves
Mhm.
or loved ones or family members or whatever the case may be. And I've got someone that works with me that she even went through, and this switches over more to the business side. She even went through some training classes with Google as far as reputation management for their Google My Business
Mhm.
listings, and how to keep it not only secure, but also how to respond to negative reviews. And when you stop and think about that, it takes on a whole new uh, era as far as thinking about, okay, not
Mhm.
only am I out here on social and I'm trying to present myself and I'm trying to present my brand, but what is happening behind the scenes that I don't see, that
Yeah.
I would only see if I start searching my name and searching for my brand and searching for this and finding out what's literally out there. So I can see why that was very memorable, because that's something that more and more people need to take seriously and do for themselves.
Yeah, like one thing that because people they Google me, right? So one of the
Mhm.
things I've been hearing and I'm going to have to deal with is those MLM books that I wrote, 10, 12 years ago.
Hmm.
They
Mhm.
still generally tend to show up fairly high in my
Really
Google search. And
interesting.
um, the thing is, that's not who I am anymore. So people get
Yeah.
confused because they're like, well, I saw your MLM books. Are you an MLM?
Mhm.
No, I'm not. So
Mhm.
as much as, those books, well, okay, those books don't bring in a lot of sales in that. It's not like,
Right,
I'm bringing in $1,000 a month. But I'm
but they're still
actually
out there.
going to have to contact
Mhm.
Kindle Direct Publishing and ask
Mhm.
them to remove them
Yeah.
because they're affecting my
Rankings,
Google presence.
and
And
when you're searched. Mhm.
yeah, and it's not that I want to remove them because they are good books, but
Mhm.
it's not who I am anymore. And I
Mhm.
just kept them up there because they're helpful books for anybody in MLM and direct
Mhm.
marketing. And I still have a heart for those people because I
Well,
spent
sure.
time in that industry.
Mhm.
But now it's starting to affect, my current business. So I'm
Mhm.
gonna have to call the not call, but contact KDP and say, listen, I need
Mhm.
those books removed.
Yeah, and that way it'll eventually start lowering those in the rankings to where they don't show up
Yeah,
immediately on a search, which makes sense. Smart
yeah.
move. Well, talking about episodes and guests, have you ever had anyone that would be considered a famous personality or a famous person on the
Well, the most
podcast?
famous person was Bob Berg.
Okay,
He was the most famous one that I've
that
that
makes
I've had
sense.
on the show. Um, to be honest, I mean, I feel like most of my guests should be famous people because they are
Because of what they
true
bring to the table. Mhm.
they are true authorities in what they do, right? And I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh man, if the world just knew. If the world
That's
just
true.
knew."
That's a good point. Well, you're 400 episodes in, and I know consistency is a big piece of the puzzle or a big portion. What in your mind has been the hardest thing about doing the podcast? Is it that consistency and longevity, or is it getting guests, or is it something completely different?
Um, Getting guests is easy.
Okay.
Um, I mean, and this is what every podcast person suffers from. So, but getting all the work done behind the scenes, that is
Okay.
hard. But I think one of the hardest things about this medium is
Hmm.
I don't get a lot of feedback. So I'm
Oh,
not I'm
okay.
not hearing from the audience. I'm not hearing what it is that they want,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm not being congratulated on it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I'm one of these personality types is like I want to reach a goal, I want it to be
Mm-hmm.
acknowledged, I want it
And
to
you
be
want to get the
celebrated.
congratulations. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that
so
makes sense.
I mean it's not that I do it for the feedback, and I
Mm-hmm.
will continue doing it even if I never get feedback.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of the harder things for me is the fact that
Okay.
um there is, it's not like when you work a job, okay,
Mm-hmm.
not that most managers are good, but you get at least get a raise if you've done
Right.
a half decent job, right? Or if you're
Mm-hmm.
part of a group or tribe and you do something, they're there cheering
Mm-hmm.
you on, right?
You at least get an
Uh,
attaboy or something.
yeah, exactly. And so, with this, even though I'm interviewing guests, sometimes it feels very lonely,
That makes sense.
podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to me, it's still worth it. But I'm just being honest. That's the hardest part. So, audience, can you come on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn? Send me a message. Just let me know that you like the podcast. Something, anything,
Mhm.
please.
Well, that feedback, well, the feedback to anything that we're trying to accomplish, whether we're, consistently out there writing blog articles, or we're out there consistently, putting out video content, whether it's short form or long form video or podcasting or anything of that nature that we do, no, no matter what personality type we may be, we still like that validation. We
Yeah.
like that. Hey, you did a good job. I enjoyed that article. That's a great take on the topic of the day. Whatever. Great episode. And we all want that. It's human nature. So I
Mhm.
can see that. And in a medium where publishing, it's tough because you have the pressure to consistently publish and get out good content, but then you also have that pressure that you put on yourself, or that we
Mhm.
put on ourselves, of making sure that it's the best product possible, but not getting that feedback saying yes it was good, or no it wasn't good, or whatever. And having that feedback is key, I think. So that's a good point. That's a
Yeah.
really good point. Now, for you, Kim, what would you say? What As far as what you get out of the podcast, and I'm not necessarily saying, um, you know, new clients or pieces of business, but what is it that you get out of the podcast? What results excite you, at least from the podcast itself?
Well, basically, I get a university level education for free.
That's a good point.
Um, a lot of the guests that I've had on the show, if I've had a problem or an issue and they're a specialist because I've let them on the
Hmm.
show, if I contact them, a lot of times they'll donate a free hour to me because
Hmm.
I've done something for them. They'll donate a free hour. They really enjoyed the interview. It was a good interview. I made them really
Hmm.
shine. They'll give me a free hour of time and answer my questions and help me solve my problems.
Interesting. That's a good
So
point.
the network of people that I've been building through this podcast,
Hmm.
um, that's very valuable to me. The
Hmm.
relationships,
The
the
relationships.
relationships with the guests on the show,
Hmm.
that has been something that I didn't expect,
Yeah,
um, from the
I can understand
podcast,
that.
but so grateful for.
Well, and I think the one thing that, if there's one, to me, one glaring thing as far as social media that people still, and I can't believe I'm saying this in 2023, but that people still overlook, is the value in those relationships.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I saw, and I've seen this meme several times, talking about how, um, you know, have you ever had somebody that you thought was a best friend betray you, but you feel closer to somebody that you've never met in person, but that you've talked to online for the past 2 years? And it's kind of that back and forth of, we build these relationships virtually, because
Mhm.
let's be realistic, probably a good 75-90% of the time we never meet the person face to face
Mhm.
in real life, as the saying goes. But we build these virtual relationships, and we build this virtual network that in some ways provides more
Mhm.
value
Yeah.
than a in-person network without
Mhm.
naming any names. But and that to me, I think that is a point to hammer home is the
Mhm.
fact that with doing this, you are connecting with these people that chances are you would have never known
True.
or never
Yeah.
met. Definitely, for the most part, you would have never run into them at a local networking event because a lot of times they aren't local. So there's a value to that that I think even today people overlook that. I
Yeah.
mean, some of the people that are literally my longest friends that I engage with on a daily basis are people that either A, I've never met face to face, or that just, they live far enough away that that probably would never happen anyway. But it doesn't discount the fact that I've gotten to know them very well. We've either
Yeah.
done business together, or we've talked business, or we have something in common that furthers that friendship, furthers that relationship. And I think it's something that even today people overlook
Mhm.
that. So that's a valuable point.
Mhm. Yeah.
So has anything really funny ever happened on the show?
Oh. So,
Or well, should I say funny or should I say embarrassing? But no, let's go with funny.
um, so I had things like the phone ring in the middle of recording episodes, and it's
Oh
kind of
yeah.
hard to.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, I've had things drop.
Yep, I've had that
I'm a
happen.
fidgeter. Like I've got
Hmm.
something going with, and if you're listening to this on the podcast, on the video, I'm sitting twirling a hair
I
elastic.
hear.
So sometimes these things are like metal and they drop and they make a big bang out of
Hmm.
the middle of nowhere. Uh, Sometimes I've had something an external noise that you can't hear
Hmm.
because this is a directional microphone, and I'll jump,
Hmm. Yep.
and people look at me. It's like,
Why? They didn't hear anything.
yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. I think some of the funniest moments in the podcast came with the
Hmm.
episodes between me and Juanita Wooten Radko, and
Hmm.
these are a lot of the older episodes. She was my co-host for probably at least a year or two.
Hmm.
And the thing about Juanita is she's been my best friend since I've been 14 years old.
Wow, that's
And
awesome.
so when we talk sometimes, like, I mean, we just feed off each other like
Hmm.
crazy. And
Yep.
I know what she's going to say next. And
Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes it's not.
we had some really funny moments there where it was just one of these off the cuff things, and the two of us are busting the gut laughing
Hmm.
because we're just like that, right? And
Hmm.
uh one of my favorite episodes that her and I did together, um was it celebrating 30 or I think it was 35. We were
Hmm.
celebrating 35 years of friendship, so we did a
Wow, that's
whole
fantastic.
episode on that.
Hmm.
And a lot of the episode was sharing embarrassing stories about each
Of
other.
course, of course. Well,
Uh,
I come from a background in high school and a few times since then as a part-time job. Worked in radio as an on-air announcer,
mm,
and one thing it teaches you to do is try to remain or try to keep control of your composure when something else is happening around you. Luckily, it was just audio. There wasn't video. But I mean, I'm dating myself, but that's okay because I'm old. Back when I was working at a local radio station part time, when I was even still in high school and out of high school, I mean, we literally actually had 45 records. So there's nothing like being in there, hot mic, talking about something, and a stack of records behind you falls over. Or, one of the other favorite things was because the way it was set up with the control board and the microphone, I mean, you could either stand, like I'm doing now, or you could sit. Well, if you were standing up and talking, the microphone had a habit of slowly descending down. And I mean, it sounds like an old Tim Conway sketch or comedian sketch where you're kind of sinking down as the microphone is going because you're still talking. But it kind of teaches you to ignore everything that's going on around you and focus on what you're talking about. And that is so incredibly hard to do. So hard to do. And it's funny that you should mention like something falling or a phone ringing. Since the pandemic and a lot of people got used to being on Zoom because they had to as they were working remotely. I think we've all gotten a little better at kind of mastering that, focusing on what's in front of us and avoiding the distraction of something over here, or avoiding the distraction of the dog or the cat that's getting ready to jump up on the laptop. And it really it's really funny because the good thing about live video, or like a live streaming event like we're doing here that's turned into a podcast, is you have things like that happen. And at least to me, that is kind of the human factor. It's not so polished
And perfect.
that, and right, so polished and perfect that nothing wrong ever happens. I mean, my favorite podcasts are the ones that are just like what we're doing, having that conversation, the back and forth. Somebody may bust out laughing and can't contain themselves. They may drop something. I don't want something that's 100% perfect, because then I know it's too produced and it's too rehearsed. So I'm more the go with the flow type person.
So speaking of that, there was one episode,
Mhm.
Tim Fitzpatrick, and I don't have my sheets right in front of me, so I can't tell you which episode number it was, but we had to record that 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
So the first 2 times, his internet kept dropping out so badly,
Yeah.
we couldn't do a full episode.
You couldn't figure.
We couldn't pull enough pieces together to do the episode, because we'd get like a minute and a half in or 2 minutes in, and in the middle of a word he would drop out. And so we had to record it 3 times.
Jeez, oh Pete.
Now it was worth it when we did, because it was an amazing episode, but that was like, oh, and
anything worth doing, you you have to have patience and keep going.
Well, and even just having systems in place, like even in Ontario, we get power outages, but here, they're a little bit more unexpected. And so now I've got, obviously my laptop has a battery, but we've got a UPS to keep the internet
the
going.
power back. Yeah, you have to
keep the internet going so you can finish off whatever it is you were doing. My husband is back in school. He's gone back to college, and they don't do their exams online. They actually write their exams physically on paper, but they're on Zoom, and they have to be sitting in such a way that the invigilator, which is the person that watches you write an exam, could see everything they were doing. So
that way you can't cheat.
10 minutes before the exam ended, we completely lost power. I heard the line snap outside the house. It was a big boom, and it snapped off the house, and the power was gone. So, and we didn't have the UPS or anything. My husband is not happy. He's trying to run out, get the generator going, get it all hooked up. We realized we didn't have, the house is set up so it's got a pony panel, so the whole basement, and I think there's like 1 or 2 outlets upstairs, are powered off this pony panel, but not here in my office.
But not in your office area.
Where the internet was. So he got the power all back on, still didn't have internet. He had to think, so then he had to run cables into my office to get power so he could get back online, and he's thinking, oh man, I failed. They're going to fail me. Like, because, he could have been cheating the whole time, right?
That's true.
He did warn the teacher that, we were having a pretty bad winter storm and there was a chance the power would go out. But, one of the things that I think is important in podcasting is authenticity and integrity. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because my husband walks in integrity, and because he does, when he finally got back online, the invigilator had already contacted his teacher, and his teacher said, you know what? Don't worry about Ross. He will not cheat. And so they accepted his exam.
Well, that's good. That's
But,
good.
I think when it comes to podcasting too, integrity is important.
It is.
Producing a good, honest show. And
Hmm.
it doesn't mean that's not professional. It doesn't mean that, it can't be hard hitting or any
You
of
can't
those
have.
things.
Hmm.
But I think, when you're podcasting, you have to be authentic.
Hmm.
You
You do.
know, I could go into my professional voice and go into, my interviewer mode
Hmm.
and all these things, but it's not
That's not.
engaging.
Well, it's not engaging, and really, that's not what people want to hear. That they
Yeah.
want to hear, at least in my opinion, they want to hear a conversation. They want to hear two people again that engaging, that back and forth,
Mhm.
having a conversation, and I think that's what sets apart good podcasts and something. Well, it sets apart good podcasts from mediocre podcasts, and I think the engaging back and forth is the key to all of it. Quite honestly,
Yeah.
so. Well, as we're heading to wrap this up, which is this has been a lot of fun. What's the one thing, if you can narrow it down to one thing, what's the one thing that you would like to leave people with? Either about your business, about the podcast, about your experiences, whatever the case may be. What's the one thing that you would like to leave them with?
When I do keynotes and other different things like that, or
Hmm.
people ask me for that final thought, I always go back to one thing. Don't be afraid to shine in your business. Don't be afraid to be
Interesting.
visible. If you want to build your business quicker,
Hmm.
the more visible you are, the quicker
The
you build
better
your
off.
business.
Hmm.
Because you let people in, you let them see you, you let them be a part of your world. You give them a tremendous amount of value. And guess what? They're going to want to work with you, right? So don't
Well,
be
that's
afraid to
true.
shine.
That's true. And we connect with people. We don't connect and we don't connect with brands like we connect with people.
Yeah.
If you see if you identify someone as that authority to play
Mhm.
off of your business author to authority, you're more likely to listen to them, pay attention to them, and want to continue that
Mhm.
connection with them. And that's something that brands can never duplicate.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of times when we talk with business owners, we try to encourage them. You know, for your brand,
Mhm.
someone has to be the face of that brand. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that they have to have a video or their picture out there on every piece of content that they put out. That's not the point. The point is people will connect more with that face of the brand than they will with a logo.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for people to realize that because if not, you kind of get lost in the sea of other content that is out there from brand A, brand B, brand C. And that's why a lot of people, a lot of brands use brand ambassadors, influencers, things like that to represent them. And it's not just to have access to those influencers' social accounts, it's the fact that you're getting someone to be the face of your brand that
Yeah.
people will connect with. So I think that's really important. Good point.
Yeah.
Very good
Yeah.
point.
And here's the other thing. You might suck at first.
Probably.
I mean, as much as I should release those first 10 episodes, there's a part of me that doesn't want to because
You
they just
really need to.
yeah.
You really
But
need to.
I will. I will. We'll do a special segment for the show where I'll release them.
Nice.
When I get time besides, putting out
Yeah.
3 episodes a
Exactly.
week. Um, but the thing is, just remember is that you're not going to be great at something when you start it.
Mm-mm. You won't, and that's
I was
okay.
not great when I started this podcast. And it's only been in the last 100,
Hmm.
really 100 or so episodes.
But you really find your footing. Hmm.
Yeah, and people have commented, guests have
Hmm.
commented on my interviewing skills and how
Oh,
great I am
how
at
it's changed.
interviewing.
Yeah, I can see
That was
that.
300 episodes in.
Hmm. Well, and if you, for an example, if you have a favorite YouTuber that you love to watch their videos, go to their videos tab and go back to the beginning. you will be shocked at the difference. And you're right. I mean, there's a good chance that you'll suck at first, but it's putting in that work, putting in the consistency. If you don't like being on camera, nobody does, except people that are paid very well for it, and even they probably don't. But you have to work through that to get your message out and to keep engaging with people. So, from my standpoint, I would encourage anyone that sees this to subscribe to your
Mhm.
podcast, to the Author to Authority podcast. Not only subscribe, but leave a review. And a lot of people overlook that. A lot of people don't remind their listeners to do that. But leaving a review, even if it's just the 5 stars, that makes a difference to the podcast. It makes a difference to people finding the podcast. So I would encourage everyone to do that as well. But this has been fun, Kim. This has been a good time. Thank you.
So, just to give you guys a little sneak peek of what's coming up, John and I are talking about doing a weekly show together on LinkedIn.
Possibly
And
so,
we
yeah.
probably will publish some of those episodes on the podcast as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I
So
think it'll be fun.
we'll do some bonus episodes.
That sounds like a great idea. Sounds like a good plan to me. Stay tuned.
Well, this has been a longer than usual episode, audience, but thank you for joining us and celebrating the 400th episode. I can honestly say
Congratulations.
that it is a joy, a privilege, and an honor to be able to serve you in this way and to give you information that you need that's going to help you move your business forward. So this has been John Lusher and Kim Thompson-Pinder on the Author to Authority podcast. If you loved it, share it out. And we will see you on the very next episode. Bye now.